This is the Montana State Republican Party platform as it stood in '08. This is what your Republican legislator or county commissioner supposedly stands for. This is usually just kind of a flag that they wave in order to get elected, but they never read this and never adhere to it. In fact, I was at one of our pachyderm meetings, which is a meeting which is an educational arm of the Republican Party, and Senator Jim Shockley said, "I've never read the platform and I never will." And if you notice up here at the top, it states Democratic Society, so obviously they're not very awake either. But here's what they say that they will stand up for. We will defend the right to acquire, possess, and protect private property from unnecessary government infringement, including state laws or regulations which erode property rights and inhibit the free use, the right to privacy, and the enjoyment of private property. Economic activities must be protected from government action which arbitrarily limits or conditions legal enterprise. Now, one of the things in the zoning regulations that affected our business tremendously is that they wanted to grandfather our business into the county, but they didn't really want businesses in the county anymore, and so they were going to hold us at basically the level we were at. And I think at the time we were at about 5 employees. And there was room for a little bit of minimal growth, but not much. And so we would have been stuck, I think, somewhere between 5 and 7 employees. And right now the business has over 30. And so if we would have listened to the government and we would have gone with their zoning regulations, then of course it would have limited or conditioned legal enterprise. Now the real problem is that in Ravalli County, we had 6 legislators who were Republicans, and we also had 2 county commissioners who were Republicans. And none of these elected officials stood up for the platform. Not one of them came to the defense of the growth policy repeal and getting rid of the zoning. The strongest language any of them used was maybe the right to vote on zoning, and I'll get into that one here in a minute. But at the very end of the election, we had one of the county commissioners and one who was running actually finally get on board with the growth policy repeal, but that was only once they saw that the winds had changed. They kind of stuck their toe in the water and saw, wow, the people really do want to repeal this, and I want to get elected, so I'm going to jump on board. But they certainly didn't aid. They didn't gather signatures. To my knowledge, not one of them signed the petition to repeal the growth policy, and they were actually no help whatsoever. Okay, you keep going down here, and it says, when the government takes less than the full title or value of the property, whether by eminent domain or regulation, just compensation must be provided to cover the diminished value of the property. And so here was a whole bunch of Republicans who signed on to the growth policy. A lot of them sat down and helped write it and did want the zoning regulations and sat on the committees and helped it go through. But as you can see down here, it would be regulation that would take full title or value from the property, and they weren't providing just compensation anywhere in the zoning. In fact, they were providing no compensation. So just on that alone, the Republicans should have really been against the zoning regulations and should have really been leading the charge to go ahead and repeal the growth policy. Now, I did go in front of the Republican Central Committee, and that was pretty interesting because on the Republican Central Committee, it was, close to probably 30 or 40% Ron Pauler type Republicans who, kind of had the mission that they did want to pull the Republican Party back to its constitutional roots. And so I went and gave a speech in front of the Republican Central Committee in Ravalli County, and in this speech I asked for their support, and a motion was made, and they did unanimously support the growth policy repeal as a Republican Central Committee. The interesting thing is, though, is that night, of course, everybody who was a precinct captain didn't show up because, they usually don't do anything. They don't take positions. They don't really support candidates in primaries. They're really kind of a paper tiger. And so a lot of them don't really show up to meetings. Well, the very next month, Dallas Erickson and Lee Foss showed up, and they asked the Republican Central Committee to reverse the position. And so there were quite a few different elements going on. There were some really great Republicans who did stand for the growth policy repeal, but a lot of the elected officials and the state party and a lot of the party insiders were highly against the growth policy repeal and did want the zoning. The Montana Republican Party advocates that all current and future state regulations and statutes be assessed and, as appropriate, amended or repealed based on whether a taking of private property may occur. So there were several different types of zoning that were coming down on Ravalli County all at the same time. We had county-wide zoning, we had the streamside or lakeside zoning, which is also wetland zoning or creek zoning. And what that type of zoning wanted to do is it wanted to zone within 250 feet on each side of every stream. Some of the creeks, I think it was down as low as 100 feet on each side. And then there was Highway 93 corridor, and what they wanted to do with this Highway 93 corridor is they wanted to start setting businesses off of the highway, and the ones that were on the highway, of course, they wanted to either fence them off or have them landscape in such a way that you couldn't see the business. Now, the crazy thing about this is that for most of these businesses, they utilize the traffic of Highway 93 in order to get customers. And so in an economic crisis, I think probably the last thing you would ever want to do is hide your business from the consumer. But these zoning advocates wanted to hide these businesses because they wanted to have a clear look at the mountains without any businesses in the way. And then there's, of course, this important bird area, which is the new thing coming down, and it's being promoted by the Audubon Society. But what they want to do is they want to take about a mile on each side of the river, and the reason is to protect birds. But the interesting thing is when these things all overlap each other, a lot of time they get confused and they can't even remember the reasons why they were doing it. For example, under streamside zoning, what they wanted to do is they wanted to take your property for wildlife. Now, the Constitution gives you the ability to protect your property from wildlife. It's not for wildlife, it's from wildlife. And so, in the important bird area, though, they say that one of the reasons that they need this area is because of overgrazing by deer. And so, on one set of the zoning regulations, you're saving your streamside property for the deer, and then in the important bird area, they're going to go ahead and take the land because of the deer. So once again, they create the problem, and then they give you the solution, which is more regulation. You know, we put too many animals out there, so now all of a sudden we need more regulations to limit the animals, and we'll need more of your land. This is what always happens. But the interesting thing is that under the county-wide zoning, for example, it was only out in the counties. If you had an incorporated city like Hamilton or Darby or Stevensville or Pinesdale, then it wouldn't affect those people. But we had a Attorney General's decision or opinion which stated that everybody in the county got to vote on county-wide zoning. And so this is very interesting because we would have had to have fought every single one of these zoning issues one at a time. And so you have to go out and you have to gather signatures and then get it on the ballot, because you don't have the right to put it on the ballot unless either you go through the constitutional initiative or referendum process that is in the state of Montana Constitution, or your county commissioners, of course, have the power to let you vote on anything. But so we would have had to have a vote on countywide zoning, streamside zoning, and Highway 93 corridor. So we would have had to have gathered signatures 3 different times, and it's no small task to gather those signatures.